was a warm Friday evening in downtown Chicago, the kind of night when the city felt alive, buzzing with laughter, headlights, and the music of life spilling out of bars and diners. In a small, retro-style diner on the corner of Franklin Street, the sound of sizzling bacon and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Inside, families sat at booths, teenagers laughed over milkshakes, and waitresses in red aprons moved around with practiced smiles. At a corner booth near the window sat Eli, a 7-year-old black boy with curious eyes, swinging his legs under the table as he nibbled on a plate of fries. His father, Raymond Cole, had stepped outside to take a phone call, leaving Eli alone for just a few minutes. Eli loved this diner. The lady at the counter always gave him an extra cookie, and the jukebox in the corner played his favorite old-school songs. He was softly humming to himself when the door chimed, and a group of 3 teenage boys swaggered in. They wore leather jackets, their hair slicked back, their laughter loud and arrogant. At the center of the trio was Chase Drummond, the 17-year-old son of a wealthy businessman who thought the world belonged to him. He spotted Eli sitting alone and smirked, nudging his friends. Well, what do we have here?" he whispered with a crooked grin. They walked straight to Eli's booth, their shadows stretching over the little boy like a storm cloud. Eli froze. He didn't understand why they were looking at him like that. Chase leaned down, tapping the table with his fingers. "Where's your daddy, kid? Or did he run off with the bill?" His friends snickered cruelly. Eli looked down at his plate, his small hands tightening around his fork. "He'll be back," he said softly. Chase didn't like that answer. He liked fear. He liked control. He leaned closer, invading the boy's space. "You people always say that, but you don't belong here. This is our spot. Rich people's spot." The waitress noticed the scene from the counter, but Chase's father owned half the buildings on the street. Nobody messed with the Drummonds. She hesitated, fear in her eyes. Chase smirked again, grabbed one of Eli's fries, and popped it into his mouth. "Thanks, kid. You're a real generous little nobody," his friends roared with laughter. Eli's eyes burned, but he held back tears. His father had taught him to stay calm, to never let bullies see his fear. But Chase wanted a reaction. He wanted to break him. Suddenly, without warning, he raised his hand and slapped Eli across the face. The diner fell silent. Plates froze mid-air. A woman gasped. The sound of that slap echoed against the chrome walls. Eli's small body shook from the impact. His cheek turned red, tears welling up, but he didn't cry. He just stared back at Chase with wide, hurt eyes. That was the moment the door of the diner opened again. Raymond Cole walked back in. He was tall, dressed in a black suit that whispered quiet authority. His presence filled the room like a storm rolling in. Everyone in the diner knew him as a successful businessman. But what they didn't know, what Chase had no clue about, was that Raymond Cole was not just a businessman. He was the boss of one of the most powerful underground Mafia networks in the entire Midwest. He spotted Eli immediately. He saw the red mark on his son's face, and something inside him went cold. Raymond didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply walked forward. Every step slow, deliberate, the kind of walk that made people move out of the way. His polished shoes echoed on the diner floor like a countdown. Chase turned around, smirking at the approaching man, not realizing what was about to happen. "Hey, old man," Chase said with a mocking grin. "We were just—" But he never finished that sentence. Raymond knelt down beside Eli, gently touching his cheek. "Who did this?" he asked in a calm, almost whispering tone that carried more danger than a scream ever could. Eli swallowed hard, pointing toward Chase. Raymond stood up slowly. His expression didn't change. It stayed calm, controlled, terrifying. The kind of calm that made grown men sweat. The diner owner, Mr. Lewis, stuttered, Raymond, maybe let's not—" But Raymond raised a hand, silencing him without a word. Chase laughed nervously. "Hey man, it's just a joke. The brat needs to toughen up. What are you going to do about it?" He didn't notice the way the 3 men in black suits, who had been sitting silently at the far end of the diner, suddenly stood up. They weren't just bodyguards. They were Raymond's enforcers. They moved like shadows, their presence suffocating. The entire diner went quiet. Chase's friends backed away slowly. Something in the air shifted. The kind of silence that comes before a storm, destroys everything in its path. Raymond stepped closer to Chase until they were face to face. A joke? Raymond's voice was low, smooth, almost gentle, but the weight of it made Chase's knees weak. You touch my son. And call it a joke? Chase tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. Man, relax. You don't know who my dad is. Raymond's lips curled into the smallest, coldest smile. And you have no idea who I am. His men closed in, forming a wall behind Chase. For the first time, Chase's arrogance wavered. His hand shook slightly. His friends had already slipped out the door, leaving him alone. Let me teach you something, boy, Raymond whispered. When you hurt someone innocent, when you use your power to humiliate instead of protect, the world has a way of teaching you a lesson. The waitress stepped back, heart pounding. Everyone in the diner felt it, the invisible pressure, the danger in the air. Raymond leaned down just enough for Chase to feel his breath. You picked the wrong child to touch. Chase stumbled backward, hitting the counter behind him. He was sweating now. The tough act was crumbling. Raymond nodded to one of his men, and in a flash, Chase's wrist was grabbed in a steel grip. The bully tried to jerk away, but it was useless. The man whispered, something in Chase's ear that made the color drain from his face. This wasn't just some ordinary father. This was power. Real power, silent, deadly, unstoppable. Raymond crouched down again to look into Eli's eyes. You okay, champ? He asked softly, his voice completely different now, warm, protective. Eli nodded slowly, still holding back tears. Raymond kissed his forehead gently, then stood up again, turning his cold gaze back to Chase. Tonight, he said quietly, you will remember that respect is earned. And disrespect has a price. The diner owner gulped. Everyone held their breath. Chase was dragged outside, his protests fading into the night. No one in the diner spoke. They had witnessed something they would never forget, and Chase Drummond had no idea that this was only the beginning. The night was darker than usual. The kind of night when the air itself felt heavier, when silence wasn't just quiet, it was loaded, tense like the city was holding its breath. A sleek black car glided down the rain-slick streets of Chicago, its windows tinted so dark no one could see inside. Chase Drummond sat in the back seat, wrists bound with a soft but unbreakable strap, his heart pounding like a drum inside his chest. The bravado he had worn like armor hours earlier had completely shattered. Now all that remained was a frightened boy, trembling in silence, watching the blurred lights of the city streak by. The car pulled up to the coal estate, a massive, iron-gated mansion sitting on a hill, its architecture cold and intimidating, like a fortress. Chase had heard whispers about this place. Before, rumors, stories, told in hushed voices by people who should have known better. They said Raymond Cole wasn't just a businessman. They said people who crossed him disappeared. The car doors opened. Two men in black suits stepped out first, then dragged Chase onto the cobblestone driveway. The house loomed over him, lights glowing from within like the eyes of a predator. Rain began to fall, cold and steady, soaking through his jacket. The gate closed behind them with a mechanical thud, sealing his fate. Inside the grand foyer, the atmosphere was thick. Everything was immaculate. Polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings of powerful black men through generations, and the faint sound of a violin echoing from somewhere deep inside the mansion. This wasn't the home of a criminal. This was the empire of a king. Chase shivered as he was led down a long hallway, every step echoing in the stillness. At the end of the hall, a set of double doors opened, and there stood Raymond Cole. He was no longer in the calm father mode from the diner. Now he was the boss, his black suit immaculate, tie perfect, gold cufflinks gleaming. But it was his eyes that spoke, louder than anything else. Cold, sharp, unyielding power radiated off him like heat from a furnace. He didn't need to raise his voice. The room itself bent to his presence. Chase was pushed into a chair at the center of the room, his heart hammering in his ears. Raymond walked around him slowly, like a lion circling prey.
Do you know what respect is, Chase?
He said quietly. Chase flinched at the sound of his name. It's when people look at someone and see their worth before they speak. But people like you. Raymond leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that burned like acid. People like you think you can decide who matters and who doesn't. Chase opened his mouth to speak, but his throat was dry. I didn't know he was your kid, he stammered. I didn't mean... Raymond's eyes narrowed. And if he wasn't my son, would that make it okay? The boy's silence was answer enough. Raymond straightened up, pacing slowly. This isn't about my son. This is about the world you've been raised to believe belongs to you. You think your daddy's money gives you power. It doesn't. Power isn't in money, Chase. It's in respect. It's in fear. It's in knowing exactly when to smile and when to destroy. The room grew colder. One of Raymond's men stepped forward, placing a thick file on the mahogany table. He opened it with precision. Inside were photographs, reports, secrets, every dirty deal Chase's father had ever been part of. Chase's breath caught. What is this? He whispered. Raymond smiled faintly, not out of joy but out of calculated cruelty. Insurance, he said. Your father plays big, but he's not bigger than me. He slid one of the photos across the table, stopping it right in front of Chase. Do you see this? This is what real power looks like. I could ruin everything your father owns before breakfast, but I don't need to touch him. I can make you the lesson. Chase's entire body was shaking now. The fearless boy who walked into that diner had vanished completely. Please, he whispered, I'm sorry. Raymond stopped pacing and stared down at him. Sorry isn't a payment, but I'm a man of structure, of rules, and I believe in balance. You hurt a child. You humiliated him. You made a room full of people stay silent because they were afraid of your name. But tonight, they'll learn to remember mine. A heavy door at the back of the room opened, and Eli walked in, holding Raymond's hand. He wore a small black hoodie, his cheek still faintly red from the slap. His eyes were steady now, strong. He wasn't afraid anymore. Raymond crouched to Eli's level. Son, he said gently, do you remember what I taught you? Eli nodded slowly. Never let anyone take your worth away, he whispered. Raymond kissed his forehead softly, then stood and turned back to Chase. You will do something for me, he said firmly. And for everyone in that diner who stayed quiet, tomorrow morning you will go back to that place. You will stand in front of every single person who saw what you did. And you will apologize, not like a coward, not like a rich boy, but like a man who finally understands what real consequences feel like. Chase blinked in disbelief. He had expected worse. But the calm in Raymond's tone terrified him even more. And if I don't? Chase muttered. Raymond's smile returned, cold, effortless, final. Then you'll find out what happens when someone chooses not to respect me. The message was clear. This wasn't a choice. It was a sentence. Chase nodded frantically. I'll do it. I swear. Raymond leaned closer. Good, but that's only the surface. You will also work every weekend at that diner for the next 3 months. You will serve the people you used to mock. You will clean tables, pour coffee, and you will learn to look people in the eyes without thinking you're better than them. Because if you don't, your father's empire will burn to the ground before he even finishes his morning cigar. The room fell silent. Chase's breath came in short gasps, but deep down, he knew it was either humiliation or destruction. Raymond turned away, dismissing him with a flick of his hand. The guards escorted him out into the rain, shoving him back into the car. As they drove him away, the coal mansion loomed behind him like a nightmare he would never forget. The next morning, as the sun rose over Chicago, the diner door chimed once again. This time, Chase Drummond wasn't wearing his expensive leather jacket. He wore a plain white shirt and a black apron. The entire diner turned to look at him. He felt their eyes like knives. Eli sat in the corner booth again, sipping his chocolate milk, watching with quiet strength. Jace cleared his throat, his hands shaking slightly. But this time it wasn't from arrogance, it was from accountability. I owe all of you something, he said, his voice cracking. I hurt someone yesterday. I acted like I was better than him. I'm not. I was a coward. I disrespected this place, and I disrespected a boy who didn't deserve any of it. I'm sorry. The diner was silent for a moment. Then the waitress from the night before stepped forward. Get to work, she said simply. And he did. For 3 months, Chase cleaned tables, served coffee, and listened. Every time someone looked at him, he remembered the man with the cold eyes and the quiet power. He remembered that night in the mansion. He remembered Eli. But something unexpected happened. As the weeks passed, the boy who once bullied began to change. He learned names. He smiled without arrogance. He worked hard, not out of fear anymore, but out of something new, respect. Raymond watched from a distance sometimes, never interfering. He didn't need to. The lesson had already been carved deep into Chase's soul. And Eli. He walked into that diner with his head held a little higher every time. One evening, near the end of Chase's sentence, he walked up to Eli's booth, placed a cup of hot cocoa on the table, and said quietly, "I was wrong. Thank you for letting me fix it." Eli looked at him, then smiled faintly. "Everyone deserves a second chance, but don't waste it." Chase nodded, truly understanding for the first time. Later that night, as the city lights blinked like distant stars, Raymond Cole sat alone in his office, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. His empire was built on fear, yes, but his son's future would be built on respect. A father's power wasn't just in destruction. It was in choosing when to crush and when to rebuild. And as for Chase Drummond, the boy who once thought he owned the world, he would never forget the night he learned who truly did. Not the rich, not the loud, not the cruel, but the ones who understood real power and wielded it wisely.